The War Council chamber fell silent as Commander Zarthek entered, his 4 arms bearing the ceremonial scars of 1,000 battles. The assembled officers of the Galactic Defense Coalition shifted uneasily in their seats, their various forms of communication organs twitching with anticipation. Representatives from 12 different species had gathered on the neutral station Harmony Point, each seeking answers to the same burning question. How had the humans, barely 3 centuries into space travel, managed to turn the tide of the Void War? Zarthek's chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting as he approached the central podium. His species, the Kethmori, were renowned throughout the galaxy as the finest warrior civilization had ever produced. Their military tactics were studied in academies across 100 worlds, their battle prowess legendary among even their enemies. Yet here stood their greatest champion, requesting an audience to speak about another species entirely. "Honored colleagues," Zarthek began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless campaigns, "you have summoned me here to understand the human phenomenon, to comprehend how these newcomers have achieved what our combined fleets could not accomplish in 50 standard years of warfare against the Void Collective." A ripple of movement passed through the assembled delegates. Admiral Kixnoda of the crystalline Veltari leaned forward, her translucent form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. "Commander, we have reviewed the tactical reports. Human technology is inferior to ours in almost every measurable way. Their ships are crude, their weapons primitive by comparison. Yet they succeed where we fail. Explain this paradox." Zarthek's mandibles clicked in what his species considered a grim smile. "Admiral, you speak of technology and weapons as if they alone determine victory. You measure their ships against our specifications and find them wanting. But you fail to understand the most crucial element, the humans themselves." He activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Kepler sector, where the most recent human victories had occurred. Red indicators marked Void Collective strongholds that had fallen to human assault forces in just the past standard month. "I have fought alongside humans for 3 standard years," Zarthek continued. "I have witnessed their methods, studied their thinking, and survived battles that should have been impossible to win. What I will tell you may challenge everything you believe you know about warfare, about courage, and about the nature of intelligent life itself." The chamber's atmosphere processors hummed quietly as delegates from across the galaxy prepared to hear testimony that would reshape their understanding of their newest allies. General Mordak of the amphibious Cyrnathi species gestured with a webbed appendage. "Commander, we acknowledge your experience. Please share what you have learned." Zarthek's eyes, compound and multifaceted, seemed to look beyond the chamber itself as he began his account. "The first time I fought beside humans was at the Battle of Sigma Draconis IV. The Void Collective had established a foothold on the planet's 3rd continent, constructing harvesting facilities to strip the world of its sentient population. Our combined fleet of 47 vessels faced their defensive force of 63 ships, including 3 of their massive Dreadnought-class vessels. The holographic display shifted to show the battle formation, with coalition ships in blue and Void vessels in ominous black. By all tactical calculations, we should have withdrawn. The Void held superior numbers and position. Our battle computers gave us a 14% probability of victory with 60% fleet losses. It was, by any reasonable measure, a battle we could not win." Ambassador Krelix of the Insectoid Hive Confederation clicked her antennae in confusion. Yet the records show a decisive coalition victory with minimal losses. "How was this achieved?" "The humans," Zarthek replied simply. "Captain Sarachun of the human vessel Indomitable requested permission to lead the assault. I was serving as tactical advisor aboard their flagship, studying their methods as part of the cultural exchange program. When I heard her plan, I was certain she had suffered some form of mental breakdown." He manipulated the holographic controls, zooming in on the human fleet formation. Captain Chun proposed that the human ships would charge directly into the center of the Void formation, breaking through their lines to reach the planet's surface while the rest of our fleet engaged from the flanks. The tactical computer aboard my own vessel calculated a 97% probability that such an action would result in the complete destruction of the human fleet. The assembled delegates exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication creating a symphony of confusion and disbelief. Admiral Kick's notice crystalline form shimmered with what her species expressed as skepticism. Surely you attempted to dissuade them from this suicidal course of action. Zarthek's mandibles clicked again, this time with what might have been admiration. I did. I presented Captain Shun with our tactical analysis, showing her the mathematical certainty of defeat. Do you know what she said to me? He paused, allowing the question to hang in the chamber's recycled atmosphere. She looked at our calculations, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "Well, Zarthek, I guess the Void doesn't know they're supposed to win." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, General Mordak spoke, his aquatic voice carrying notes of confusion. I did not understand this response. How does ignorance of probability affect actual outcomes? That, Zarthek replied, is precisely the wrong question to ask about humans. They do not approach warfare the way we do. We calculate odds, analyze force ratios, determine optimal strategies based on known variables. Humans treat these calculations as suggestions rather than laws of physics. He advanced the holographic display to show the beginning of the engagement. The human fleet, consisting of 12 vessels led by the Indomitable, accelerated toward the Void defensive line at maximum velocity. But what they did next defied every principle of space combat I had learned in 40 years of warfare. The display showed the human ships beginning to spin along their longitudinal axes while maintaining their forward momentum. They began rotating their vessels while firing their weapons in all directions. Not aimed fire, mind you, but what Captain Chun calls suppressive fire. The effect was to create a sphere of destruction around each ship as they carved through space. Commander Valessa of the energy-based photonic collective pulsed with what her species considered incredulity. But this is wasteful, inefficient. The energy expenditure alone should have depleted their weapons systems within minutes. Indeed, Zarthek agreed. And I pointed this out to Captain Chun as we watched her fleet disappear into the chaos of battle. She smiled at me, an expression I had learned indicated either pleasure or the onset of complete madness in humans, and said, "Efficiency is for peacetime, Commander. This is war." The holographic display showed the Void formation beginning to fragment as human ships carved impossible paths through their defensive lines. The Void Collective's artificial intelligences, much like our own battle computers, operate on principles of logical optimization. They position their ships for maximum defensive coverage while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. They calculate firing solutions based on predicted enemy movements and establish overlapping fields of fire to create kill zones. Zarthek manipulated the display controls, highlighting the growing chaos in the center of the formation. But the humans were not following any recognizable pattern. Their ships moved in ways that defied tactical logic, spinning and weaving through space in maneuvers that should have left them vulnerable from multiple vectors. The Void computers could not predict their movements because their movements were, by any reasonable standard, insane. The display showed human ships breaking through the inner defensive perimeter, their weapons still firing in all directions as they dove toward the planet's surface. But here is what truly demonstrated the difference between human thinking and our own. As the human ships reached the planet's atmosphere, they did not seek optimal landing zones or attempt to establish secure beachheads. Instead, they aimed directly for the population centers where the Void were conducting their harvesting operations. Ambassador Krelix's antennae twitched with what her species expressed as alarm. But the civilian casualties, surely they could not have conducted precision strikes while employing such chaotic tactics. Zarthek's compound eyes fixed on the ambassador with an intensity that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. This is where you begin to understand the true nature of human warfare, Ambassador. Captain Chun did not intend to conduct precision strikes. She intended to land her ships directly in the middle of the civilian population centers, regardless of the danger to her own forces. The holographic display shifted to show the planet's surface, where human ships were descending through layers of anti-aircraft fire from void defensive positions. I watched from the orbital command center as 12 human vessels, each carrying approximately 300 Marines, performed what they called combat drops directly into cities under siege. Their ships took tremendous damage during the descent. 3 vessels were destroyed entirely before reaching the surface. General Mordak's gills fluttered with what his species considered distress. Surely this represents poor tactical planning? To accept such losses for uncertain gain. That question demonstrates the fundamental difference between our species and theirs, Zarthek replied. We measure success in terms of objectives achieved versus resources expended. Humans measure success differently. When I later asked Captain Chun how she evaluated the mission's outcome, she told me, "We got our people on the ground where they could make a difference. Everything else is just details." The display zoomed in on one of the human landing sites, showing the chaotic urban battlefield where void harvesting operations had been interrupted by the sudden arrival of human Marines. What happened next changed my understanding of what intelligent beings are capable of when driven by desperation and determination. Zarthek highlighted specific areas of the urban zone, showing the movements of human forces as they spread throughout the city. The Void Collective operates on principles of efficient population harvesting. They establish control points at key infrastructure nodes, deploy automated collection systems to gather civilians, and maintain security through superior firepower and psychological intimidation. Their methods had proven effective against dozens of species across the galaxy. The display showed void collection points as dark red zones connected by movement corridors. But the humans did not attempt to counter these tactics through conventional means. Instead of targeting military objectives or attempting to disrupt void command and control systems, they did something that our tactical manuals had never considered. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the assembled delegates. They began saving people. The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Kixnota's crystalline voice. "I do not understand. Is this not the objective of any liberation operation?" "No, Admiral, you still do not grasp what I am telling you. We plan liberation operations to achieve strategic objectives that result in civilian populations being freed from enemy control." The humans ignored strategic objectives entirely. They focused solely on the immediate preservation of individual lives, regardless of tactical consequences. The holographic display showed human Marines moving through the city in small groups, each team heading directly toward the nearest concentration of civilian population. I watched Marine Sergeant James Rodriguez lead a squad of 8 soldiers against a void collection facility that held approximately 200 civilians. The facility was defended by automated weapon systems and 50 void drones. According to our tactical analysis, a successful assault would require at least 200 attackers with armored support. Zarthek manipulated the controls, showing the facility in detail. Sergeant Rodriguez looked at the situation, counted his 8 Marines, and said, "Well, boys, we're about 20 times outnumbered. Sounds like a fair fight." Then he and the squad charged directly at the facility's main entrance. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as the display showed the tactical impossibility of 8 individuals assaulting a heavily fortified position. Commander Velessa pulsed with confusion. "But this is suicide. No rational being would attempt such an action." "And that," Zarthek replied, "is precisely why it worked. The void defensive systems were programmed to respond to rational tactical approaches. They positioned their weapons to cover likely avenues of approach, established overlapping fields of fire to create kill zones, and prepared defensive positions to repel organized assault forces." The display showed the human squad moving in an erratic pattern that defied military logic, with individual Marines breaking away from the group to attack from impossible angles. But Sergeant Rodriguez and his Marines did not approach the facility in any way that could be described as organized or logical. They scattered in 8 different directions, each Marine apparently pursuing his own individual plan of attack. Zarthek highlighted the movement of one Marine as he climbed the exterior wall of a nearby building, while another was shown crawling through a drainage system, and a third appeared to be setting something on fire in what looked like a completely unrelated structure. The Void defensive systems could not target them effectively because they were not operating as a coherent unit. Each Marine was essentially conducting his own personal war against the entire facility. The display showed the climax of the assault as explosions began erupting throughout the facility from multiple directions simultaneously. Within 15 minutes, the facility's defensive systems were neutralized, the Void drones were destroyed, and 200 civilians were being evacuated to safety. Sergeant Rodriguez's squad suffered 2 wounded and 0 fatalities. General Mordak's gills fluttered rapidly with what his species expressed as disbelief. How is this possible? The mathematics do not support such an outcome. Because, General, humans do not limit themselves to mathematics when lives are at stake. When I later interviewed Sergeant Rodriguez about his tactical planning, he told me something I will never forget. He said, "Commander, there weren't enough of those metal bastards in that building to stop us from getting our people out." Simple as that. Zarthek's compound eyes swept across the assembled delegates as he prepared to continue his testimony. But this single engagement was merely the beginning. What happened across the rest of the city over the following 6 hours demonstrated that Sergeant Rodriguez's actions were not an anomaly, but rather a representative sample of how humans approach impossible situations. The holographic display expanded to show the entire urban area, with dozens of similar small unit actions occurring simultaneously across multiple sectors. Every human squad that had landed in the city was conducting similar operations. Not as part of a coordinated plan, mind you, but because every human soldier who encountered civilians in danger responded in exactly the same way, by attacking whatever was threatening them, regardless of odds or consequences. The display showed the cumulative effect of these individual actions as Void control zones began disappearing across the map like lights being extinguished. Within 6 hours, a force of approximately 2,000 human Marines had disrupted harvesting operations across an entire planetary continent, freed over 50,000 civilians, and effectively broken Void control of the region. Ambassador Krelix's antennae clicked with what her species considered profound confusion. But how did they coordinate such complex operations without centralized command and control? Zarthek's mandibles clicked in what might have been either amusement or bewilderment. They did not coordinate, Ambassador. That is what I have been trying to explain to you. Each human unit operated independently, making decisions based on immediate local conditions rather than following predetermined tactical plans. He manipulated the display to show communication patterns between human units during the operation. Their battlefield communications consisted largely of status reports and requests for assistance, but each unit continued to operate autonomously regardless of whether help was available. When Marine Lieutenant Sarah Kim's squad encountered a situation requiring more firepower than they possessed, she did not request reinforcements or wait for support. The display zoomed in on Lieutenant Kim's position, showing her 12-person squad facing a Void stronghold containing an estimated 300 enemy combatants. Instead, Lieutenant Kim evaluated the situation, turned to her communications specialist, and said, "Martinez, call in an artillery strike on our position. Danger close." When her communications specialist pointed out that such a strike would likely kill her entire squad along with the enemy, she replied, "Then we better get those civilians out before the shells arrive." The silence in the chamber was profound as the implications of this statement settled over the assembled delegates. Finally, Admiral Kixnota's crystalline form shimmered with what her species expressed as incomprehension. "Commander, Are you saying that human military doctrine includes the deliberate sacrifice of their own forces? No, admitted. Human military doctrine includes the assumption that their forces will find a way to accomplish impossible tasks if the alternative is allowing civilians to die. Lieutenant Kim did not plan to sacrifice her squad. She planned to evacuate 300 civilians from a fortified position defended by superior numbers in the 12 minutes before friendly artillery fire would level the entire area. The display showed Lieutenant Kim's squad moving into the stronghold with what could only be described as controlled desperation, each Marine moving with purpose despite the mathematical impossibility of their mission. They succeeded. All 300 civilians were evacuated safely. Lieutenant Kim's squad suffered 75% casualties, but no Marines were killed, and the void position was eliminated. Zarthek paused, allowing his words to resonate through the chamber. When I later asked Lieutenant Kim how she had planned to achieve such an impossible objective, she looked at me with what I can only describe as confusion and said, "Commander, those people needed help. We were the only ones in position to help them. There wasn't really a choice to make." The War Council chamber remained silent as Commander Zarthek's testimony continued to reshape their understanding of their human allies. The holographic display still showed the urban battlefield where impossible victories had been achieved through methods that defied every principle of military science they had ever learned. The pattern repeated itself across every engagement throughout that campaign. Zarthek continued, his voice carrying the weight of witnessed impossibilities. Human forces consistently achieved objectives that our tactical computers rated as impossible, using methods that violated every principle of logical military planning. He gestured toward the display, where dozens of similar engagements were highlighted across the planetary surface. But what truly demonstrates the difference between human thinking and our own became clear when we analyzed the strategic implications of their actions. The Void Collective, faced with such unpredictable and seemingly irrational resistance, began to withdraw from populated areas rather than attempt to maintain their harvesting operations. General Mordak's aquatic voice carried notes of confusion as he spoke. But surely this was the intended strategic outcome? To force void withdrawal from civilian population centers. Zarthek's mandibles clicked with what his species expressed as grim amusement. That is what any rational military planner would assume, General. But when I discussed this with Captain Shun after the operation, she made it clear that strategic considerations had never entered into their planning. The holographic display shifted to show post-battle analysis data, with strategic implications mapped across multiple sectors. I asked Captain Shun whether the human command structure had calculated that their tactical methods would produce void withdrawal from population centers. She looked at me as if I had asked whether they had considered the effect of their actions on the planet's geological stability. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as the implications of this statement became clear. Commander Valessa pulsed with what her species considered bewilderment. Are you suggesting that humans achieve strategic objectives without strategic planning? I am telling you that humans do not separate strategic objectives from moral imperatives the way we do, Zarthek replied. Captain Shin told me, Commander, we didn't fight to achieve strategic outcomes. We fought because people were dying and we were in a position to stop it. The strategic results were just a side effect of doing what was right. The chamber's atmospheric systems hummed quietly as the assembled delegates processed this information. Finally, Ambassador Krelik spoke, her voice carrying the weight of species-wide confusion. Commander, you are describing military doctrine based on moral principles rather than tactical optimization. Such an approach should result in catastrophic casualties and mission failure. And yet, Zarthek replied, human forces achieved complete mission success with lower casualty rates than our own computer models had predicted for conventional approaches to the same objectives. This paradox haunted me throughout the remainder of that campaign. He advanced the holographic display to show the final phases of the Sigma Draconis 4 operation, where coalition forces had achieved total victory over a numerically superior enemy. The Void Collective abandoned their harvesting operations across the entire system within 2 standard weeks of the human intervention. An enemy that had successfully resisted our combined fleets for 8 months was driven out by tactics that should not have worked. The display showed the aftermath of the human intervention, with civilian casualties significantly lower than projected and Void forces in complete retreat. But the most disturbing aspect of this victory was not the tactical impossibility of what the humans had achieved. It was the realization that their success challenged everything we thought we knew about the nature of warfare itself. Zarthek's compound eyes fixed on each delegate in turn as he delivered his conclusion. I've spent my career studying military science, analyzing tactical principles, and optimizing strategic outcomes. I believe that warfare was a problem to be solved through superior planning, better technology, and more efficient application of force. He gestured toward the holographic display, where the impossible human victory remained mapped in glowing detail. The humans taught me that warfare is not a problem to be solved, but a choice to be made. They do not fight to achieve objectives or optimize outcomes. They fight because they choose to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, regardless of the cost to themselves. The silence that followed was profound, broken finally by Admiral Kixnota's crystalline voice. Commander, if human methods are so effective, why have they not shared these tactical principles with coalition forces? Zarthek's mandibles clicked with what might have been either amusement or despair. Because, Admiral, their tactical principles cannot be taught or programmed or analyzed. They arise from something that appears to be unique to human psychology: the willingness to sacrifice personal survival for abstract moral principles. He manipulated the display controls one final time, showing comparative casualty figures between human and non-human coalition forces in similar engagements. Every species in this chamber values individual survival above abstract concepts. We fight to protect our people, our worlds, our civilizations. But we calculate acceptable losses and withdraw when casualties exceed strategic value. The display highlighted the stark differences in engagement parameters between human and non-human forces. Humans appear to be the only species we have encountered that will accept certain death rather than abandon civilians to enemy action. This creates tactical possibilities that simply do not exist for any other intelligent species. General Mordak's gills fluttered with what his species expressed as philosophical distress. But such behavior should be selected against by evolutionary pressure. How could a species survive if individuals consistently choose group welfare over personal survival? That, General, may be the most important question any of us could ask, Zarthek replied. Because the answer to that question may determine whether we win this war against the Void Collective. The War Council chamber fell silent once more as the assembled delegates contemplated the implications of Commander Zarthek's testimony. In the space of one presentation, their understanding of their human allies had been fundamentally altered, replaced by questions that challenged their most basic assumptions about the nature of intelligent life and the principles that govern survival in a hostile universe. The holographic display continued to show the impossible victory at Sigma Draconis IV, where human forces had achieved the unachievable through methods that defied logical analysis. But for the delegates of the Galactic Defense Coalition, the true battlefield had shifted from the distant reaches of space to the realm of ideas, where everything they thought they knew about warfare, survival, and the nature of intelligent life itself had been called into question by the actions of their newest and most puzzling allies. The following standard day brought no relief to the troubled thoughts that plagued the coalition delegates. They had reconvened in the same chamber, but the atmosphere had changed fundamentally. Where before there had been confident analysis and tactical discussions, now there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that permeated every conversation. Commander Zarthek's testimony had shattered their understanding of human capabilities, but it had also raised questions that none of them felt equipped to answer. As Zarthek entered the chamber for the second session, His 4 arms bore fresh, ceremonial paint that marked him as a bearer of difficult truths. The delegates had specifically requested continuation of his testimony, seeking to understand more about human combat methods and their implications for the ongoing war against the Void Collective. Honored colleagues, Zarthek began without preamble. You have asked me to elaborate on human combat psychology and its practical applications in warfare. What I am about to share with you comes from direct observation during the Battle of the Helix Nebula, where human forces encountered the Void Collective's most advanced tactical units. The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the Helix Nebula, where a massive coalition fleet had engaged Void forces in what was considered the largest space battle of the war to that point. The engagement involved over 300 coalition vessels facing approximately 250 Void ships, including 5 of their new Annihilator-class capital ships equipped with reality distortion weaponry. Admiral Kik Snoda's crystalline form shimmered with remembered tension. I commanded the Veltari contingent in that battle, Commander. Our losses were catastrophic until human forces arrived. I have been unable to understand how their intervention changed the tactical situation so dramatically. Zarthek's compound eyes focused on the Admiral as he manipulated the display controls. Admiral, you experienced the human intervention firsthand, but I suspect you never understood what you were witnessing. The humans did not simply arrive with superior firepower or advanced tactical systems. They arrived with something far more dangerous. A complete disregard for the mathematical certainties that constrain every other species' combat doctrine. The display showed the initial phase of the battle, with coalition forces arranged in defensive formations that had been optimized by the galaxy's finest tactical computers. The Void Collective had deployed their new Annihilator vessels in a formation designed to create overlapping reality distortion fields. Any vessel entering these fields would experience temporal displacement, making coordinated attacks impossible. General Mordak's aquatic voice carried notes of remembered frustration. Our fleet computers calculated that conventional assault tactics would result in 90% casualties with minimal probability of success. We were preparing to withdraw when the humans arrived. Indeed, Zarthek agreed. And when Captain Marcus Thompson of the human vessel Defiant received tactical briefings about the reality distortion fields, his response demonstrated the fundamental difference between human and non-human approaches to impossible situations. The holographic display highlighted the human fleet as it approached the battle zone, consisting of 18 vessels led by the heavy cruiser Defiant. Captain Thompson studied the tactical analysis for approximately 30 seconds, then turned to his communications officer and said, "Get me a channel to all human vessels." When a channel was established, he transmitted a message that I will never forget. Zarthek paused, his mandibles clicking with what his species expressed as bewildered admiration. Captain Thompson's message to his fleet was simply this: boys and girls, the enemy has some kind of time-warping nonsense that's supposed to make it impossible to fight them. Sounds like they're scared of fair fight. Let's go show them what scared really looks like. The silence in the chamber was profound as delegates from across the galaxy attempted to process the implications of this statement. Commander Velessa pulsed with confusion. But surely human tactical doctrine includes analysis of enemy defensive capabilities? How could they hope to succeed without understanding the nature of the reality distortion fields? That question reveals your continued misunderstanding of human psychology, Zarthek replied. Humans do not analyze enemy capabilities to determine whether victory is possible. They analyze enemy capabilities to determine how to achieve victory despite those capabilities. The display showed the human fleet accelerating toward the Void formation at maximum velocity, ignoring the reality distortion fields entirely. As the human vessels entered the distortion zones, something unprecedented occurred. The temporal displacement effects that had paralyzed our own forces seemed to have minimal impact on human tactical performance. Ambassador Kreelix's antennae clicked with what her species expressed as scientific curiosity mixed with disbelief. "Commander, Are you suggesting that humans possess some form of natural resistance to reality distortion weaponry? Zarthek's compound eyes gleamed as he advanced the display to show detailed sensor readings from a battle. Not resistance, Ambassador. Adaptation. When human vessels entered the distortion fields, they experienced the same temporal displacement effects as our ships. But where our crews became disoriented and confused by the chronological inconsistencies, human crews simply adjusted their tactics to accommodate the changed conditions. The display showed human ships moving through the distortion fields in patterns that appeared chaotic, but maintained surprising effectiveness. I monitored communications between human vessels during this phase of the battle. When Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park reported that her ship was experiencing temporal loops that caused the same 5 minutes to repeat multiple times, her response was to use those repeated time frames to perfect her attack runs against the same void target. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as the implications of this tactical adaptation became clear. Lieutenant Commander Park transmitted to her squadron, "Team, I got the same 5 minutes to work with over and over again. I'm going to use them to figure out exactly how to kill this annihilator. Stand by for optimal firing solutions." The holographic display showed the impossible sight of a single human vessel conducting repeated attack runs against a massive void capital ship, with each repetition allowing the human crew to refine their tactics based on observed results from previous loops. Within what our chronometers measured as 23 minutes, but which Lieutenant Commander Park experienced as over 4 hours of repeated engagement, she had developed a perfect attack pattern that exploited a microscopic vulnerability in the Annihilator's defensive systems. General Mordak's gills fluttered with what his species expressed as ontological distress. But how is this possible? Temporal displacement should make coherent tactical planning impossible. For any species that requires linear time progression to maintain cognitive function, yes, Zarthek replied. But humans appear to possess a form of consciousness that can maintain tactical coherence even under conditions of severe temporal distortion. When I later asked Lieutenant Commander Park how she had maintained situational awareness during the temporal loops, she told me, "Commander, time is just another battlefield condition. You adapt to it like you adapt to anything else." The display showed the cumulative effect of human adaptation to the reality distortion fields, as each human vessel developed unique tactical solutions to the specific distortion effects they encountered. But what truly demonstrated the terrifying nature of human combat psychology was not their adaptation to impossible conditions, but their exploitation of those same conditions to achieve tactical advantages that should not have existed. Admiral Kick's notice crystalline form pulsed with what her species expressed as urgent curiosity. "Commander, please explain what you mean by exploitation of temporal distortion effects." Zarthek manipulated the display controls, highlighting a specific engagement between the human vessel Indomitable and 2 Void Annihilator ships. Captain Rodriguez of the Indomitable found herself trapped in a temporal acceleration field that caused her ship to experience time at approximately 10 times normal rate. From her perspective, the enemy vessels appeared to be moving in slow motion. The display showed the tactical situation from multiple temporal perspectives, illustrating the disorienting effects of the distortion field. Any rational tactical response would have been to escape the acceleration field as quickly as possible, since remaining within it would cause severe stress on both crew and ship systems. Captain Rodriguez chose a different approach. The delegates watched in stunned silence as the display showed the Indomitable deliberately maneuvering deeper into the temporal acceleration field. Captain Rodriguez realized that her accelerated time frame gave her tactical advantages that outweighed the physical stress on her vessel. She could observe enemy movements with perfect clarity, plan complex attack sequences, and execute multiple tactical maneuvers while the enemy ships remained essentially frozen in space. The display showed the results of this impossible tactical decision, as the Indomitable systematically dismantled 2 massive Void capital ships, using weapons that should have been inadequate for such an engagement. Captain Rodriguez spent what she experienced as 6 hours in accelerated time, though only 37 minutes passed in normal time frame. During that subjective time span, she conducted detailed analysis of enemy ship systems, identified critical vulnerabilities, and executed precision strikes that disabled both Annihilator vessels. Commander Velessa pulsed with what her species considered philosophical distress. But the physical toll of such temporal displacement should have incapacitated her crew within minutes. Indeed, it should have, Zarthek agreed. When Captain Rodriguez finally brought her ship out of the acceleration field, her crew was suffering from severe temporal displacement syndrome. 3 crew members required immediate medical attention, and Captain Rodriguez herself was unconscious for 18 hours. The silence that followed was broken by Ambassador Krelix's incredulous voice. "Commander, are you telling us that human crews will accept certain incapacitation rather than abandon a tactical advantage? I'm telling you that human crews do not consider personal survival when evaluating tactical options," Zarthek replied. When I later reviewed Captain Rodriguez's tactical logs, her decision-making process was documented in detail. She calculated the probability of mission success versus crew survival, determined that accepting crew casualties would maximize tactical effectiveness, and proceeded accordingly. The holographic display shifted to show the broader battle situation, where human tactical adaptations had begun to cascade through the entire engagement. But the most disturbing aspect of human combat psychology became apparent when other human vessels observed Captain Rodriguez's success and began deliberately seeking out reality distortion fields to exploit. General Mordak's aquatic voice carried notes of disbelief. Surely this represents poor tactical discipline? Individual commanders cannot simply abandon coordinated battle plans to pursue personal tactical experiments. Zarthek's mandibles clicked with what might have been either admiration or horror. That statement reveals your continued failure to understand human military doctrine, General. Human tactical coordination does not rely on predetermined battle plans or centralized command authority. It relies on something far more dangerous: individual initiative guided by shared moral purpose. The display showed multiple human vessels throughout the battle zone, each pursuing unique tactical approaches based on local conditions and individual commander assessment. Every human captain in the engagement began developing innovative methods to exploit the Void's reality distortion weaponry, not because they were ordered to do so, but because they observed that such exploitation was tactically effective. Ambassador Krelix's antennae twitched with what her species expressed as conceptual vertigo. But how can military forces maintain coherent objectives without centralized tactical control? Because human military forces share something that makes centralized control unnecessary, Zarthek replied. They share what they call mission intent. Every human soldier, from the lowest-ranked enlisted personnel to fleet commanders, understands not just what they are supposed to do, but why they are supposed to do it. The holographic display highlighted communications between human vessels during the battle, showing how tactical innovations were shared and adapted across the entire fleet without formal command structure. When Captain Thompson of the Defiant observed Captain Rodriguez's success with temporal acceleration fields, he did not request permission to attempt similar tactics. He evaluated local conditions, identified a different type of distortion field that could be exploited, and proceeded to develop his own tactical innovation. The display showed the Defiant deliberately entering a spatial compression field that caused the vessel to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Captain Thompson realized that spatial multiplication effects could be used to create the illusion of a much larger human fleet. From the Void perspective, a single human vessel appeared to become 5 identical ships attacking from different vectors. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as the implications of this tactical adaptation became clear. Commander Velessa pulsed with what her species considered existential confusion. But if the spatial compression was merely an illusion, how could it have tactical effectiveness? Because the Void Collective's artificial intelligences responded to sensor data rather than tactical reality, Zarthek explained. Their tactical computers detected 5 human vessels and allocated defensive resources accordingly. The fact that 4 of those vessels were spatial projections rather than physical ships was irrelevant to their tactical calculations. The display showed the cascading effects of Captain Thompson's innovation as void defensive formations began to fracture under the strain of responding to threats that were simultaneously real and illusory. But what truly demonstrated the terrifying nature of human tactical thinking was not Captain Thompson's exploitation of the spatial compression field, but his crew's response to the severe spatial distortion effects they experienced. Admiral Kixnota's crystalline form shimmered with apprehension. "Commander, what were the effects of existing in multiple spatial locations simultaneously?" Zarthek's compound eyes seemed to look beyond the chamber as he recalled the impossibility of what he had witnessed. Captain Thompson's crew experienced multiple simultaneous realities, each corresponding to one of their spatial projections. Effectively, every crew member existed in 5 different locations at the same time, experiencing 5 different versions of the same battle. The silence in the chamber was profound as the assembled delegates attempted to comprehend the psychological implications of such an experience. Finally, General Mordak spoke, his voice carrying notes of species-wide horror. Surely no intelligent being could maintain sanity under such conditions? Any rational evaluation would suggest complete psychological breakdown within minutes, Zarthek agreed. But human crew members not only maintained psychological coherence, they used their multiple simultaneous perspectives to coordinate tactics across all 5 spatial projections. The holographic display showed tactical coordination patterns that defied every principle of individual consciousness. Navigation Officer Elena Vasquez reported experiencing the battle from 5 different spatial perspectives simultaneously. Rather than becoming confused or disoriented, she used this multiple awareness to coordinate perfect tactical positioning across all 5 projections. The display highlighted the impossible complexity of 5 simultaneous battle perspectives being processed by a single consciousness. When I later asked Officer Vasquez how she had maintained coherent tactical thinking while experiencing multiple realities, she told me something that fundamentally challenged my understanding of the nature of consciousness itself. Zarthek paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the assembled delegates. Officer Vasquez said, "Commander, reality is what you make of it. If I can think clearly enough to help win this fight, I don't care how many places I have to exist to do it." The chamber's atmospheric systems hummed quietly as delegates from across the galaxy struggled to process the implications of this statement. Ambassador Krelix's voice carried notes of philosophical distress when she finally spoke. "Commander, you are describing psychological capabilities that should not be possible within the constraints of individual consciousness. How do humans maintain cognitive coherence under conditions that would destroy any other form of sentient life?" "That question has haunted me for 3 standard years," Zarthek replied. "And I believe the answer reveals something about human psychology that may be unique in the galaxy. Humans do not experience reality as something that happens to them. They experience reality as something they participate in creating." The holographic display shifted to show the final phases of the Battle of the Helix Nebula, where human tactical innovations had completely disrupted Void collective combat doctrine. The cumulative effect of human adaptation and exploitation of reality distortion fields was to transform the Void's most advanced weaponry into a tactical liability. What had been designed to create insurmountable defensive advantages became weaknesses that human forces could exploit with devastating effectiveness. The display showed Void Annihilator vessels beginning to withdraw from the battle zone as their reality distortion fields became sources of tactical vulnerability rather than defensive strength. Within 4 hours of human fleet arrival, the Void Collective had lost 7 Annihilator vessels and was in complete retreat from the Helix Nebula system. Enemy forces that had successfully resisted coalition fleets for over 2 standard years were routed by 18 human vessels using tactics that violated every known principle of space combat. General Mordak's gills fluttered with what his species expressed as strategic bewilderment. But surely the Void Collective will adapt their tactics to counter human psychological advantages? No technological system remains vulnerable once its weaknesses are understood. Zarthek's mandibles clicked with what might have been grim amusement. That assumption reveals your continued misunderstanding of the nature of human combat effectiveness, General. Human tactical advantages do not arise from technological superiority or strategic planning. They arise from psychological characteristics that cannot be countered through technological adaptation. The holographic display showed post-battle analysis data, highlighting the fundamental differences between human and Void tactical approaches. The Void Collective operates on principles of logical optimization and technological superiority. They develop advanced weapons systems, analyze enemy capabilities, and implement tactical solutions based on mathematical calculations and strategic analysis. The display highlighted the contrast between Void tactical doctrine and human combat methods. But humans do not limit themselves to logical optimization or mathematical calculations. They treat technological limitations and tactical impossibilities as problems to be solved through creative application of willpower and moral determination. Commander Valessa pulsed with what her species considered analytical frustration. But willpower and moral determination cannot overcome technological superiority and mathematical certainty. And yet they consistently do, Zarthek replied. Every engagement between human forces and the Void Collective has resulted in human victory despite technological and numerical disadvantages. This pattern cannot be explained through conventional analysis of military capabilities. The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Kixnoda's crystalline voice. Commander, if human combat methods are so effective, why have they not shared these capabilities with coalition forces? Surely tactical advantages should be disseminated throughout allied military units? Zarthek's compound eyes fixed on the Admiral with an intensity that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Because human tactical advantages cannot be shared, Admiral. They arise from psychological characteristics that appear to be unique to their species. What we call courage, they consider normal behavior. What we call impossible, they consider challenging. The holographic display showed comparative analysis between human and non-human military performance in similar tactical situations. I have attempted to implement human tactical methods with Kethmori forces under my command. The results were catastrophic. My warriors, trained from birth for combat, and renowned throughout the galaxy for their battlefield prowess, could not adapt to conditions that human crews treat as routine challenges. The display highlighted specific examples of non-human forces attempting to replicate human tactical innovations. When my second-in-command attempted to exploit temporal distortion fields using methods observed from human forces, his crew suffered complete psychological breakdown within minutes. Kethmori consciousness cannot maintain coherence under conditions of severe temporal displacement. General Mordak's voice carried notes of species-wide concern. Commander, are you suggesting that human psychological characteristics represent an evolutionary advantage that other species cannot match? I am suggesting that human psychology may represent something unprecedented in galactic history, Zarthek replied. Every intelligent species we have encountered evolved survival strategies based on logical analysis of environmental conditions and optimization of resource allocation. Humans appear to have evolved survival strategies based on the rejection of environmental limitations and the transformation of impossible conditions into tactical opportunities. The holographic display shifted to show long-term strategic implications of human combat effectiveness against the Void Collective. The Void Collective has been forced to abandon multiple star systems specifically because human forces make their advanced tactical systems inoperable. Reality distortion weaponry, quantum suppression fields, temporal displacement generators. All of the Void's most sophisticated technologies become tactical liabilities when deployed against human forces. Ambassador Kreelix's antennae clicked with what her species expressed as strategic concern mixed with philosophical uncertainty. Commander, if humans can neutralize Void technological advantages so effectively, what does this mean for the balance of power in the galaxy once this war ends? The question hung in the chamber's recycled atmosphere like a challenge to every assumption about interspecies relations and galactic stability. Zarthek's compound eyes swept across the assembled delegates as he prepared to address implications that extended far beyond military tactics and strategic planning. That question, Ambassador, leads us to considerations that transcend military analysis, Zarthek replied. What we have witnessed in human combat performance may represent not just a tactical advantage in our current war, but a fundamental shift in the nature of power itself throughout the galaxy. The holographic display showed projections of post-war galactic political structures, with human influence highlighted across multiple sectors. Human military effectiveness has already begun to reshape alliance structures and strategic partnerships. Species that have maintained independence for millennia are actively seeking human protection. The Void Collective, which had never been successfully resisted by any galactic power, is now in strategic retreat from human-defended territories. The silence that followed was charged with implications that none of the delegates felt prepared to address. The second session of Commander Zarthek's testimony had expanded beyond military analysis into questions about the future of galactic civilization itself, where the arrival of humanity had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape in ways that no one could fully predict or control. The final session of the War Council convened under circumstances that none of the delegates had anticipated. Word had arrived during the night cycle that human forces had achieved what military analysts had declared impossible. They had successfully assaulted and captured a Void collective primary manufacturing facility. This was not merely another tactical victory, but a strategic breakthrough that could fundamentally alter the course of the war. Commander Zarthek entered the chamber with a ceremonial paint bearing new markings that indicated he carried testimony of unprecedented significance. The assembled delegates waited in tense silence as he approached the central podium, each representative struggling to comprehend how their understanding of warfare and human capabilities could be challenged yet again. Honored colleagues, Zarthek began, his voice carrying the weight of witnessed impossibilities. The events I am about to describe took place 72 hours ago at the Void Collective's primary manufacturing facility in the Andromeda Reach. What human forces accomplished there transcends every category of military achievement we have previously recognized. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional representation of the most heavily fortified installation in known space. The manufacturing facility appeared as a massive geometric structure surrounded by defensive platforms, energy barriers, and automated weapon systems that defied comprehensive analysis. This facility had been the primary objective of coalition strategic planning for 8 standard years, Zarthek continued. Every major military power in the galaxy had contributed to invasion plans that our finest tactical minds had declared unassailable. The facility's defensive systems included quantum-locked barriers, reality anchor fields, and temporal isolation protocols that made conventional assault impossible. Admiral Kix Noda's crystalline form shimmered with remembered frustration. The combined fleets of the Coalition attempted assault on that facility 3 times, Commander. Each attempt resulted in complete tactical failure with catastrophic losses. Our final analysis concluded that successful assault would require technological capabilities that do not exist within current galactic civilization. Zarthek's compound eyes gleamed as he manipulated the display controls. Admiral, your analysis was correct according to every principle of military science and technological capability. The facility was indeed impregnable to any conventional assault force. But humans do not approach military objectives through conventional methods. The display zoomed in on the facility's defensive perimeter, showing energy barriers that could vaporize entire fleets and automated systems capable of adapting to any known tactical approach. The human assault force consisted of a single vessel, the destroyer Persistence, carrying 300 Marines commanded by Colonel Maria Santos. According to every tactical analysis, this represented approximately 1,000th of the force strength required for successful assault. General Mordak's aquatic voice carried notes of disbelief. "Commander, surely even human forces could not expect to achieve success with such inadequate numbers? This represents tactical planning beyond the boundaries of rational thought." That observation reveals your continued misunderstanding of human psychology, General, Zarthek replied. Humans do not plan tactical operations based on adequate force levels or rational probability calculations. They plan operations based on moral necessity and then adapt their methods to achieve success regardless of constraints. The holographic display showed the approach of the Persistence toward the manufacturing facility, a single small vessel advancing against defenses that had repelled entire fleets. When Colonel Santos received her mission briefing, she studied the facility's defensive systems for approximately 15 minutes, then turned to her staff and said, "Well, team, looks like we're outnumbered about 10,000 to 1. Sounds like they're taking this seriously." The silence in the chamber was profound as delegates attempted to process the implications of treating such overwhelming odds as a source of professional satisfaction rather than tactical despair. Commander Valessa pulsed with confusion. But what possible tactical approach could address such severe force disparity? Colonel Santos approached this challenge the same way humans approach every impossible situation, Zarthek replied. She ignored the mathematical impossibility and focused on the practical question: how to get her Marines inside the facility where they could accomplish their mission. The display showed detailed analysis of the facility's defensive systems, highlighting the multiple layers of technological barriers that had defeated every previous assault attempt. The quantum lock barriers were designed to prevent any form of matter or energy from passing through their perimeter. Reality anchor fields maintained absolute spatial stability, making teleportation or dimensional transit impossible. Temporal isolation protocols prevented any form of time-based infiltration. Ambassador Krelix's antennae clicked with what her species expressed as analytical confusion. "Commander, you have described defensive systems that eliminate every known method of military infiltration. How could any force, regardless of tactical innovation, overcome such comprehensive barriers?" Zarthek's mandibles clicked with what might have been either admiration or existential bewilderment. Colonel Santos evaluated these defensive systems and identified what she considered their fundamental weakness. They were designed to stop military forces attempting to penetrate the facility's defenses. The delegates exchanged glances across the chamber, their various forms of nonverbal communication creating a symphony of confusion. Finally, General Mordak spoke, his voice carrying notes of species-wide perplexity. "Commander, I fail to understand how defensive systems designed to stop military infiltration could be considered inadequate for that purpose. Because Colonel Santos did not plan to penetrate the facility's defenses, General, she planned to become part of them." Zarthek manipulated the display controls, highlighting the manufacturing facility's resource intake systems. Every defensive installation requires regular resupply and maintenance. The facility's defensive systems were designed to prevent hostile infiltration, but they could not function without allowing authorized supply transports to pass